So welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a series of monthly broadcasts where we interview people about their spiritual lives and how they share that with others. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, interfaith minister. I'm director of spiritual services at Constellation Hospice here in Newburyport, and I also offer spiritual coaching on a virtual basis and on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a meditation teacher at North Shore Insight Meditation Center and a retreat leader exploring the intersection of Buddhist and Christian meditation traditions.
Our show is based on the four following assumptions. Number one, everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we are conscious and active regarding our spirituality, sometimes not. But even when not, we still have a spirit.
And second, that there are many ways to lift your spirit, not just through traditional religious practices, but also through nature, art, human relationships, service to others, just to name a few.
And three, each person's spiritual path is unique and may change in small or large ways over time.
And fourth, that it's important to respect your own spiritual journey, trusting that one step leads to the next, and also to respect the unique spiritual journeys of other people, even though it may be very different from your own. We're not here to convince you of the benefits of any particular method or path, but more just to offer you some food for thought.
And I'm very happy to have a good friend, colleague, Reverend Stan Barrett with us today. I know Stan from working with him as a hospice chaplain at Hospice of the North Shore, which is now referred to as Care Dimensions. Stan has been a congregational minister, and through his interest in the poetry of Rumi, got interested in Islamic Sufism, and he's going to share with us, among other things, about Sufism and its relation to Islam. So thank you very much for joining us, Stan. And we start with always asking our guests to share about their spiritual life, their journey from young years to present.
I think it's a good place to start, the personal journey. Well, I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee as a Presbyterian, and I often say that I have, if not nothing, at least very little to complain about that background. I feel that I learned about the love of God and about love of tradition, but in a context that also was comfortable with the modern world. I went to college at Florida State University, and there found I took one religion course, seminar in Sufism, in my senior year, and that was my introduction to Sufism. Went to theology school at Candler School of Theology at Emory University and was ordained in the United Church of Christ, which many know is the denomination which in 1957 has incorporated most of what were congregational churches before that.
What motivated you to go to theology school out of college? Because you only took the one course. What was driving that?
Well, the cause and effect were a little bit different. What drove me was a sense of calling, I think. I had thought about being a minister when I was in high school and gave it up. Went to college as a music major, piano performance at first and then music history. Planned to go on and get a master's and a PhD in musicology, but spent 6 months in my senior year in the Foreign Studies Center that the Florida State University system has in Florence. And in that deeply Catholic culture, really got clarity that I wanted to be a minister. I know that's a very general sort of answer to your question, but when I got back, I thought, well, maybe I should take a course in the religion department. Because it's not necessary. One does, people are admitted into theology schools with all kinds of backgrounds. And I just thumbed through the course listing and found this seminar on Sufism. And there we are.
Now, had you known what Sufism was? What attracted you to that particular course?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I don't remember. It drew me. I had been, when I often said that I have nothing to complain of in my Presbyterian upbringing. The one thing that I did not get, but which I think one can do without through one's childhood and youth, was an introduction to Christian mysticism. But I really became introduced, not just in terms of Christianity, but more largely with the mystical point of view, if you can say there's only one mystical point of view, during college. So that probably, in a general sense, attracted me to this course. And maybe it would just happen to be a course on mysticism that was available that particular quarter. I can't remember whether I had any larger knowledge of Islam. So I took the course, and during the next, through my time in theology school and afterwards during ordination and the first, let's say, 5 to 10 years, I was learning what it was like to be a minister in a local church. I was minister of the Middleton Congregational Church in Middleton, Mass. From 81 to 87, but also began to read some of the modern translations that were coming out of works of Jalaluddin Rumi, and was really sort of refreshed the interest that I had begun to have in that course during college. And then in 93, I think it was, I found my way to a Sufi group in Brattleboro, Vermont, which happened to be of the order of Sufis called the Mevlevis, or in Arabic, Maulawis, just variant versions of the term. And they are the traditional whirling dervishes. And I am moved to say in the moment, in answer to a question that hasn't been voiced, what drew you to that? And I think at first it was beauty. Because for example, the traditional ceremony of turning has, over the centuries, had beautiful music composed specifically for the turning ceremony. And of course, there's the texts of Rumi. So there's the music and the texts and the physical discipline of turning or whirling. And as I came to know later, the deep, rich intellectual tradition of not only of Islam, in which Sufism is rooted, but specifically of the mystical path. And one other thing I should say was that after being exposed to the turn, in my first couple of days of knowing this group during a summer gathering in northeast Vermont, I went to their first weekly meeting and came in shortly after the group had started, and they had already started their sitting meditation. And I was struck by the depth of the silence. So, sort of right alongside being drawn to beauty, was being drawn to the je ne sais quoi of the depth of the silence. So, to be brief about following on from there, by the mid to late 90s, I had gotten so deeply into my journey into my being drawn into Islam and Sufism that I chose to give up my standing as a minister in the United Church of Christ. Not because I did not love Jesus anymore, and not because I think that there aren't many people in pews of congregational, Episcopal, Lutheran, what have you, churches in this country that don't have points of view perhaps very similar to mine. But it's a different thing to be a formal, if you were, representative of a denomination which is intentionally Christian. Liberal though the United Church of Christ may be, I felt like I needed to give up that standing, and so I did. and eventually found my way to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Newburyport, the First Religious Society, where one can be, as I, with my tongue partly in my cheek, sometimes call a liberal Protestant Muslim. And not just in the pews, but in a role, a clerical role, a clergy role, a ministerial role. I am an affiliate minister at the First Religious Society, which means that I am not formally a part of the staff. I'm not paid anything, but I preach once a year and sometimes provide support for Reverend Rebecca when she goes away. That's what it means to be, at least in my case, an affiliate minister. So I do have a ministerial role in that sense, but I am retired. Retired for 5 years after being 15 years hospice chaplain. Long answer to a short question.
Yes, interested in your work as a hospice chaplain as well, and how, in what ways that's been formative for you as you've gone on in your journey.
I think it interesting question. The reason I hesitate is because I think of my journey having informed that more than that having informed my journey. But I think it was suited to me. That work was suited to me because it's in many ways easy to be a hospice chaplain. You're not having to formally present yourself that much, though sometimes you lead funerals, memorial services. But it took advantage of, if you will, my ability to just be present with people.
Yes.
As Joel's nodding his head, as are you.
Yeah.
But Joel's done this work too. It's just a work of where being present is the most important thing. I mean, that's something that we're taught in our training as ministers or as chaplains anyway. But it's a place where formal presentation is not so often the important thing. It was a place where I could comfortably be for 15 years and pursue my side interests, which are reading and music and spiritual work. So that any work that one does on oneself, whether it's reading, whether it's deepening of oneself, always with the help of God, by the grace of God, those things one doesn't just do, they are done with one and through one, but any of that happens can be poured into the work or seep into the work, whether consciously or not. So, and I guess you'd also have to say that if you were inclined to walk through life with the common, almost universal human delusion that we're not going to die, that work would sort of disabuse you of it, or at least, unless you're really hard rock, it can help to keep you disabused of the notion that you'll live forever.
Yes.
I hope you hear my joking, half joking.
Yes, absolutely. And that I think any deep spiritual path is going to take one to the brink of that exploration of what is death, or even which I understand is a Sufi expression to die before you die.
Yes.
What is it that is eternal and changeless, was never born, will never die, and that just having that kind of background, I think, can really add to the presence that you bring to people who are in the process of dying and aware that they are.
Yes, I think so, and I hope so. My wife, who is a social worker, says that she thinks that hospice work worked for me relatively comfortably because of my beliefs.
Yes.
And I think she's right,
Yeah.
that I don't believe that physical death is the end of our reality or God's reality manifested through us. I don't believe that's the end, so I'm sure that was a part of it. But I'm also led to say that even though I was raised with a belief in God, and in a certain sense, because belief, forgive me for sounding like a professor for a moment, but belief comes from the Middle German belieben, which means to give one's heart to. Raised, or I like to say, or to discover that one's heart has been given to, because it's not always a conscious decision. So I was raised with belief in God, and in some sense have reinforced that over the years. I think one of the things that my spiritual work makes me realize is that from time to time, there's a window that opens into myself that shows me how much I don't believe. There was a time, and Joel heard me speak of this briefly, passingly, in my sermon a couple of weeks ago at First Religious Society. Time a few years ago, shortly after I retired and during COVID, when many of us were isolated and a lot of the props of who we are were sort of removed, or at least largely removed, when I went through what turned out to be a sort of chronic anxious state. But we didn't know that that's what it was, and my doctors had not pinned that down for me, so I was very anxious, and it manifested itself physically. And as I was saying to a dear friend recently, when you're scared out of your wits, if you're honest with yourself, you realize, well, I don't seem like much of a believer. I don't seem like much of one who gives his trust to God, or to that deepest self which is rooted in God. I'm giving a hint about Sufism there. But so, it's important to know that even if we can say honestly that, yes, the reality of God seems self-evident to me, sometimes I say that, but there are times when it's anything but self-evident. So, it's important to say those things. It's part of honesty and seeing oneself. And to bring it to the content of Islam, to see things as they are is one way to talk about what we ask for on the path. One of the 99 names of God, and by the way, in Islam, they're not just 99. There are an infinite number of names of God, but 99 that are sort of in the canon, if you were. One is the Haqq, H-A-Q-Q, Haqq. It can be reality or truth. So to see things as they are is what one asks for. And my teacher, Rafiq Al-Ghan, has said to us once that the body is in vibrational harmony with God, the spirit is in vibrational harmony with God, but it's the personality that needs to come into, and I guess you could say part of, maybe not a synonym of, but a part of personality is ego, which puts us in the realm of what many of us, at least in the West, a term that we use for what we need to get beyond in the spiritual work. So coming into harmony with the vibrationally with that which is. So easy to say those words and to say those sentences, and means virtually nothing in terms of the walk. Right? It maybe helps to create a point of view,
Right.
and that's useful.
Yes.
But
Pointing us in a direction.
yes. I could sound like I know what I'm talking about here, and really I know very little of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, that is the real difficulty of talking about any of this stuff that goes deeply into spirituality, and there's this wonderful Zen expression about that, which is open your mouth and you're wrong.
Yes.
But we try.
Yes.
But
And-
much of it is ineffable, not subject to rational understanding or rational speech.
Yes, even along the way that's true, and Islam has an expression for that process, an expression that supports one in that process. It's called Allahu Akbar, which means God is greater. Sometimes it's translated even by newscasters as God is great. It's not God is
Yeah.
great. It would be Allahu Kabir, would be God is great. But the comparative and superlative form is Akbar, God is greater, which supports us to always be saying, okay, if we're going to talk about it at all and not just keep silence, which is, of course, the direction that we're given on the path sometimes, because you open your mouth and you're wrong. If we're going to open our mouth, then we can say, to the best of my understanding, and the understanding that comes to me through this tradition or many traditions, is that God, source, is like this, or more or less like this. We want to be careful. But Allahu Akbar, and Allahu Akbar tomorrow. My understanding of God tomorrow hopefully will be different from my understanding of God today, and so forth. And so constantly remembering that God is greater than any understanding I can ever be, and then having as an understanding that at the end of it all, God as essence is, well, cite the name of a Christian book, The Cloud of Unknowing, the state that one can go into. So
Yes.
in the end, the essence of God is unknowable to us human beings.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah. So you've used the term Islam and you've used the term Sufism. Could you talk about the relationship of the two?
Yes.
And particularly in relation to, as we were talking about before, how people perceive, because of news media, Islam as opposed to the truth.
Yes, yes. So let me just mention to start with, so as to put it out of the way, but acknowledge it respectfully, and that is that there are those in this country especially, but not only, let's say in Western Europe and other places perhaps, who think of Sufism as separated from its roots in Islam. And I think one can just take one's hat off and respect that that is their path. But for me, the historical roots in Islam are important to my practice. What can we say of Sufism? Sufism is a term that we use. Let's say a good one struggles on this, because what is mysticism is one of the words that's used, Islamic mysticism. But mysticism is such a misleading term, or can be, because it seems it brings up images of smoke and mirrors, or swallowing fire, or swallowing swords, and those things may exist in the world. I don't necessarily doubt them, but they're not important, and they're not the path as Sufism is usually followed. William Chittick, who is one of the world's experts on Islamic mysticism, teaches at State University of New York, says in one of his writings that he prefers to use the word unveiling instead of mysticism. So you could say that Sufism, Islamic mysticism, is the path of those who want to go deeply into their the standard Islamic practice, so that at least in the traditional Muslim world, not all people who wanted to go deeply into their practice would have called themselves Sufis, because you have to also say that Sufism had a sociological aspect, which was there were Sufi orders. You've heard me refer to that. So there are
I'm very
groups that
interested
meet
in that.
periodically, meet weekly or whatever.
You're very interested in the different orders, because I think in my own mind I hadn't even realized, and it was one of the questions that I had, is whether there are these different kind of threads that are going in close to the same direction but have different emphasis, the different orders?
Yeah, yes, I mean, I think you've said it very nicely. The closest parallel would be orders within the Christian world. Most of us know them through Catholicism, or there are also Episcopalian orders, and maybe there are others that I don't know of. But that's the immediate reference for most people, and yes, going in the same direction in that they are organized paths influenced by the founder of the order in terms of his, her, what he or she found to be the path to deepening. And so, for example, Rumi is in some sense the fountainhead of the Mevlevi order, which you heard me refer to, the one that's known by its most characteristic spiritual practice of the turning. But one must also say that he may be the founder of that specific order, but Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is understood before that to be the real fountainhead of that tradition, and Muhammad is understood within mainstream Islam to be the last of a long line of prophets and messengers. Prophets is a larger category of those who God has sent to call humankind back to who they really are, and the messengers are a smaller group, those who brought a book, and they're understood to be 4 books: the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospels, and the Quran. So Muhammad is understood to be the last of this line of prophets, and at that, a messenger. So now I've sort of lost myself, but I am in the course of things saying something about the Islamic background
Yes.
of Sufism. So Sufis are, let's say, the most recognizable or the most visible form, mostly through their orders, of those who want to go more deeply into their practices, the practices that are standard for Muslims. So 5 times a day prayer, fasting during Ramadan. The first, actually, of the 5 pillars, so-called pillars of Islam, is the Shahada, the statement, Ashhadu, I testify, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, God messengers Allah. God represents, God brings the message from Muhammad brings a message from God. That is the first. Now, of course, if I'm having to list 5, I'll probably leave some out. 5 times a day prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and the Hajj, going on Hajj once in one's life if one can afford to do it. So those practices, at least for traditional Muslims, would have been the basis for those who wanted to go more deeply into their practice. So, to speak just very broadly, you could say that Sufis want to go more deeply into practices of zikr, or in Arabic dhikr, which means a practice of remembrance of God. Because within the Islamic context, somewhat in contrast to the Christian context, where if you look at your anthropology, your understanding of what it is to be a human being, the basic human problem is sin. Within the Islamic context, the basic human problem is forgetfulness. So the prophets and the messengers are sent to remind us. That's why they come. And the practice of 5 times a day prayer is to remind us 5 times a day, no matter what you're doing, you stop what you're doing. I mean, if it's a matter of life and death, of course you don't. You keep doing CPR, for example. But if you're in the middle of writing a paper, you stop and do the prayers. The fasting once a year for 28, 29 days during the lunar month of Ramadan is to remind you who you are and whose you are, and what that you usually think you have to do, you actually don't have to do. Eat during the daytime. You're allowed to eat and drink at night, and have sexual relations with your beloved, which you're not during the daytime. If you smoke, you can smoke at night. Those things you're not supposed to do during the daytime. So fasting is, you could say, from a sort of spiritual point of view, a religious point of view, to remind you of God. On the other hand, they're to take you deeper into who you are as a human being, because preoccupation with our bodies and with the habits that we have is a way that the good can get in the way of the better, and the better of the best.
Yes.
So reminder of who we are. Almsgiving, of course, is a way of, it's understood to be a purifying of the things that we have. And Hajj is a way of reminding us that journey, which of course can be seen as a metaphor for the journey back to God, that's what it's really about in this life. So traditionally, before you went on Hajj, you had to put all your affairs in order and head for Mecca as if you were never coming back, as if you would die in Mecca. Remembrance.
As we're sitting here on this Wednesday, I'm realizing that it is Ash Wednesday.
And Valentine's Day.
And Valentine's Day. But as you're describing the fasting during Ramadan, the Lenten practices of the Christian faith seem kind of parallel.
Yes, yeah.
And one of the things that occurs to me that's related to this is that most people, I think, who have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to Islam don't recognize how related it is to the other so-called Abrahamic religions, and that, I think more and more there is a sense of of scholarship and looking at the interrelationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that they are part of a tradition that stretches way, way back.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you see it the same way, or I'm just kind of my...
No, you're very right. And when you say that more and more there's that realization, perhaps one should say that there's more and more of a realization on the part of the general public and of academia, though academia has known this for a long time, but on part of Muslims, at least Muslims who understand their religion deeply, know deeply about it, and certainly the traditional view within the Quran is that Jesus and Muhammad are the last in a long line of prophets, and both of them, once again, messengers. Jesus brought the gospel, Muhammad brought the Quran, so prophets and messengers. But yes, Islam is very much, from my point of view and the point of view of traditional Islam, in the line of the Hebrew prophets. And it is true to that in many ways, including at least two that I'll mention. One is that though it's not primarily structured by narrative, as much of at least the Hebrew scriptures are, it's not primarily a narrative book, but it refers back to narratives in the Hebrew scriptures and to Jesus. So it's clearly connected in that way. It's part of that cultural milieu. But also it's clearly in the prophetic tradition in the sense that one of the ways you could talk about the Hebrew tradition, as I understand it, is you don't grind the widow and the prophet under your heel, calling people to justice. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So that characterizes Islam too. It very much it was about and is about caring for how people care about each other. One of the most significant things that happened is that in the Arabic community into which the Quran was revealed, girl infants were often exposed in the desert to die because they were less desirable than boys. And Islam put an end to that. I mean, it seems minimal these days, but it was not a minimal change at that time. And there's a story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that he on his walks through Mecca regularly went past a house of a widow who understand the Prophet's message was not welcomed by everyone in Mecca. So a widow, every time he went by, would dump her garbage out of the window onto his head. He'd just keep on walking. And one day, there was no garbage coming out of the window. Went on past. I may not remembering the story exactly. I may be adding too many days, but the second day, no garbage. The third day, because 3 is a good way to tell a story, there was no garbage, and the prophet knocked, no answer, went inside and found the woman in really bad shape. She was sick, very sick. So he saw that she was taken care of. So this is an image of the prophet. It's just a very concrete image of what I was saying about the call to justice. And the call to justice you know, Jesus is in this line too. You know, we're to pray for our enemies. He went in to take care of her. And I mean, the story goes, if you became a Muslim, let that not be, let that not appear to be the point of the story. but an outcome, of course, because it certainly is the case that sometimes people come closer to the truth and to God, if you will, through those kinds of actions. But that's not the real point. The point, whatever the results were on her part, was caring for another human being whose action toward him he knew would have continued. Yes. So how am I doing in the rooting in Islam? And the Sufis are those who want to go more deeply. And so the practices of zikr, whether chanting various names of God, just Allah, 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 or familiar phrases, La ilaha illallah, there's no other God but God. So in a group of Sufis or an individual sitting on her carpet might just chant that. The whirling is a practice of zikr. I sometimes say, you know, using the body to get beyond the body. Not, mind you, that the body is a bad thing, but that once again, the habits that we have toward the body and the assumptions about what we have to have for its maintenance can get in the way of remembering who we are more deeply, right? So these practices, I always say that because it's easy, certainly within Christianity, probably for many Muslims, I don't know about for Jews, but it's easy to take this kind of disciplining of the body as at least implying that the body is less than good, but God created it and found it good.
Yes.
So along the lines that we're talking, I don't know if I got this right, but I heard once that there's more mention of Mary in the Quran than in the New Testament.
I don't know about the comparisons, but I wouldn't doubt it. There's a whole surah. A surah is a chapter in the Quran about Maryam, which is the Arabic word for Mary. And Muslims believe in the you see my mind goes blank now, that she was conceived virginally, that she conceived him, Jesus, virginally.
And how about her? I was wrong on this for so long, not understanding the Immaculate Conception, which was actually her conception being conceived without sin.
Yes,
so
yes.
She was conceived without sin, and then she gave a virgin birth to
That's right.
Jesus.
That's right.
And so is the whole package in
I'm not aware if it is. No, I'm not aware of that. I think not.
Okay.
But thank you for making that point again, because I'm sure that some of your listeners and viewers maybe are hearing that for the first time, that the Immaculate...
As I just did from him about 3 days ago.
that conception was immaculate, and of course you could definitely make a good Peanuts or Pogo cartoon out of. Now, what does that mean? This is sex, but it's immaculate. Now, what does that mean? You know. Sex without lust, perhaps, but you know. In any case, yes. The understanding of the Immaculate Conception is that is how Mary was conceived immaculately, but through normal human means.
Yes.
But that Mary was overcome, but willingly said, "Yes, be it done unto me according to your will," and it was the Holy Spirit who conceived with her Jesus.
Yes.
Yes. So yes, Mary is an important figure in the Quran.
Now, when I think of Sufism poetry,
Yes.
I think of love. I mean, incredible expression of love for Allah.
Yes.
So if you could say anything about, or maybe even share one with us.
I'd be ready for a poem.
Yes. Those who are listening would be interested to know that I wasn't planning on bringing poetry, but it was a beautiful invitation, and Joel is inviting me to a couple of points. First is the love poetry, and then I would add for myself that Rumi's appeal in the modern world is largely stemming from that. But if you get deeply into his poetry, you don't actually have to go very far to find that the emphasis on sacrifice too, because the spiritual path, and not just for Muslims, but certainly for Christians, I imagine for Jews too, and certainly for Buddhists and Hindus, involves what I might call a radical relativization of the ego. Mm-hmm. A radical relativization of the ego, and we don't let go of anything, especially so central to our necessary functioning in life as the ego, right? In fact, within Sufism, Satan, is identified with the ego. Mm. So there's the both sides. There's the love, which most of us hear, first of all, and maybe forever in Rumi's poetry, and there's also what it costs to move along the spiritual path. So here's a beautiful one by Rumi. I won't take the time to read the whole thing. These poems most often were not given titles, but this one was given a title by its translators, Water and Wine. With your sweet soul, this soul of mine has merged as water does with wine. Who can part the water from the wine, or me from you, when we combine? This is probably addressed to the divine beloved. You have become my greater self. How can smallness limit me? You've taken on my being. How shall I not take on yours? Forever you have claimed me, that forever I may know you're mine. Your love has pierced me to the depths. Its ecstasy entwines both bone and nerve. I rest as a ney. This is the traditional Ottoman reed flute. I rest as a ney laid upon your lips. As an oud, which is a stringed instrument, played like this, I lie against your breast. Breathe deeply in me that I may sigh. Strike upon my strings and tears glisten. Sweet are my tears and sweet my sighs. Worldly joys I return to the world. You remain in my inmost soul, whose depths the mirrored heavens reflect. O pearl in this muscle shell, O diamond in my darkest mine. In you this honey is dissolved, O milk of life, so mild, so fine. Our sweetness is all merged in you, sweeten infant smiles. You crush me into rose oil, drop by drop, nor do I complain beneath the press. In your sweet pain, pain dissolves, for I, your rose, had this intent. You bade me blossom on your robe and made me for all eyes your sign. And when you pour me upon this world, it blooms in beauty, fully divine. Mm. Wow. So I broke my promise. I did read you the whole poem.
Yeah, glad you did.
So that we can get to the crush me into rose oil, drop by drop. Mm. And once again, I feel like I must say at this point, I could seem like I know what I'm talking about here. But if I know anything at this point in my life, well, not anything. I know that my friends love me and my sweet wife loves me and is teaching me about love. I know lots, maybe. But if I know anything in terms of the spiritual path, it is what a challenge it is to accept that crushing or that dissolving.
Yes.
Dissolver of sugar. Dissolve me if now is the time is another beginning of another Rumi poem that many people know. So I may sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm a neophyte and I know the challenges.
As we had discussed briefly before, how difficult it is to speak about deep spiritual matters, that poets are frequently much more effective, not in a sort of intellectual explanation of anything, but of a sort of a motive pointing in the direction in which we're traveling. And I think that poem was absolutely beautiful in that respect.
Yes, I don't want to downplay the richness and subtlety of the Islamic and Sufi intellectual tradition, but when it comes down to it, in terms of doing the work, it's a good place to start to realize it's not a work of the head, it's a work of the heart. is not mindless at all. Sometimes we talk about the heartful head or the head and the heart, so that's a good way to put them together. But if you have to make a choice, it is a work of the heart. Yeah. And being willing to be carried to the point of knowing that you don't know. And that's one step along the way, anyway.
Yes. Yes.
Or
maybe the most important one.
And it's not also when I say that, I realize in Sufism there's what's called a hal and what's called now I've forgotten. I can't even remember. So forget about my terminology. But a hal is a state, is a something that you come to. And so I could have sounded now like I was, well, if we get there, we're there. But these things may come briefly and then go. When you really get to the state that to a stage, then it's more persistent, you know. So but to even get a glimpse of it is an important thing. Oh. And this is not just because of aging that I can't remember this phone number or this name. I'm making a joke about about aging at almost age 72. But that this is not just a matter of the 33 RPM thing skipping a groove. This is confusion that's a good thing. It's a confusion that one needs to come to, and may I welcome that more often.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
May I welcome that more often.
Now, you mentioned in that poem, nay,
The nay.
and explained what that is. But you are a practitioner, a player of the nay.
Yes, one. I'm a little bit hesitant to accept that. Yes, I am practicing. I'm a practitioner.
That's what I meant by practitioner.
No, I understand. I know what you mean. But one knowing what real practitioners, good practitioners can do with the nay reminds me of how, you know, dervish is one of the words that we use for a Sufi, a dervish, and it means doorway. But it's from an esoteric point of view, one should be one is very wary about calling oneself a dervish with the doorway. So, am I a practitioner? I sometimes blow the nay, or invite the nay to be blown through me. Rumi says in one of his best-known poems, this flute is blown with fire and not with wind. But the wind, if we do think of it as wind, comes through us. Yes, I've been playing at the nay since mid-90s, and like anything else, it needs to be really stuck with. And I'm enough of a dilettante that I've been doing a lot of things and not just focusing on the nay. But it's a wonderful symbol within Sufism because it is made from a reed that's pulled out of the reed bed. And Rumi, in this poem that's also often called the Song of the Nay, which is the very beginning of his great teaching work, the Mesnavi or the Mathnawi. He says, you know, the human being, when I am played in gatherings of men and women, I cause them to weep because they long to return to their reed bed just as I do. So the sound that I make is like a wailing, and it reminds people of their tears. Maybe they're not even remembered tears, or if they are crying because of life, they don't realize that they actually have deeper tears because they've been pulled from their reed bed by virtue of creation. They've sinned into creation, which is also God's blessing. So one needs to be careful about not seeing this world as a bad thing, a bad thing, but one is called back to one's origin and one's deepest reality.
And generally speaking, to the sort of universality of grief, not as a bad thing, but as a sort of necessary counterpoint to joy, that you can't really have one without the other. The grief allows the heart to be open enough to receive that joy.
Yes, and I think that that's one of the things, I haven't really emphasized this yet, but in my teaching about Sufism, and I mean the teaching that comes to me from Sufism, that working in the body is really important.
Yes.
That spirituality is not about leaving the body. At least that's not the method, that's not the approach. We work in the body, and therefore, for example, Lenten fasting, or whatever practices one may have in Lent, and certainly Ramadan fasting within the Islamic and Sufi context, is a time when one, in one's emptiness, and one fasts from water, unless it's medically dangerous for one to do it, fast from water as well as food. So by the end of the day, one can easily be in a different sort of state, where one does not as easily pull things together in terms of, if you're doing heavy thinking work, one's physical energy may be different, though that doesn't mean you can't do things physically, though, in passing, you'd say that if you were working in the hot sun in Georgia and Ramadan is in the summer, you're not expected to hurt yourself. But nevertheless, in that state, one is closer to not only to God, inshallah, God willing, but closer to one's feeling. And therefore tears are more likely.
Yes.
I wasn't just going on a tangent. I was
Yes.
trying to bring it back. So we work in the body. So digging in the well, which is one image of doing the work of remembrance. And from one point of view, it is a digging in the body, or paying attention to what comes up in the body. And as I said earlier, using the body sometimes. One of the ways to do that is using the body in zikrs of various sort, rhythmic use of the body, whether can seem like davening, which is not just about movement, I understand. It's about prayer, but like the movement of davening. Once again, that's a zikr, or it can support zikr. So using the body to get beyond the body.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and we started talking a lot about mysticism.
Yes.
And I just want to mention that the Unitarian Church in town is putting forth a series of talks on mysticism in different religious traditions. So if people are more interested in learning more about the mystical approach, go to the Unitarian Universe First Religious Society website, and all three of us are presenting in that series. So I want to mention that. And we always finish up our show with asking our guests to share any encouragements, ways to lift the spirit. So,
may I do it with a poem again?
Sure.
Yeah,
please.
absolutely.
This is I have colleagues who now use their iPads or their laptops for writing their sermons, and so you'll see them not reading from a sheet of paper, but reading from an iPad, and that's what I'm going to do. So, lifting the spirit, I would say this, I hope it lifts the spirit by speaking to a deep level of who we are. Rumi begins this poem, which is entitled by the translators, "This We Have Now," probably refers to a state that one would get in either sitting by oneself or in a group where one is really still and experiencing something that's beyond one's usual experience of self and life and the world. This we have now is not imagination. This is not grief or joy. Not a judging state, not an elation or sadness. Those come and go. This is the presence that doesn't. It's dawn, Hussam. Hussam was a dear spiritual friend of Rumi's. Here in the splendor of coral, inside the friend, which is a name for God, the simple truth of what Halaj, another great Sufi, said. What else could human beings want? When grapes turn to wine they're wanting this. When the night sky pours by, it's really a crowd of beggars, and they all want some of this. This that we are now created the body cell by cell, like bees building a honeycomb. The universe and the human body grew from this, not this from the universe and the human body.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stan, for that and for all that you've shared with us. Very enlightening, encouraging, pointing us in the work that we're all doing here. And may you be well, enjoy Valentine's Day, and all our listeners and viewers as well, and Ash Wednesday. And we will be back again with our guest for the month of April. Thank you for watching and listening.
And blessings upon everyone's journey.
Thank you for coming, Stan. It was a real pleasure speaking with you.
Mine too. Thank you for inviting me.